The sun had barely risen when the sound of hooves thundered from the south. The children of the village fell silent, a mother dropped her basket of half-harvested turnips, and the chickens scattered as if someone had thrown boiling water at them. The first rays of morning light peeled away the mist hanging over the hills, revealing a warband caked in mud, blood, and silence, men who looked more like ghosts than soldiers, trudging into the village like a nightmare that never ends. They did not shout, nor draw their swords. They brought no fire, no banners. Just silence. But in their eyes was hell, freshly crawled out from the earth. Wind swept through the thatched hovel of old Myros, lifting loose straw he had gathered the night before to patch the roof. He stood there, hunched and brittle, watching the road where hoofprints and cart ruts sank deep in the mud. Beside him was his 6-year-old grandson, still drowsy, but already knowing to stay silent when strangers entered the village. In war, silence was life. A sound could summon death. No one knew exactly when the war began. They only knew that 3 winters ago, men with black flags descended from the north, burning fields, stealing cattle, taking women, killing those who resisted. Then came the soldiers with red lion crests, cutting down anyone accused of aiding the enemy. For peasants like them, there were no allies, no sides. They were weeds trampled underfoot by every passing army. A young soldier, barely grown, paused before old Myros' door. He said nothing, only pointed to the water jar. Myros nodded and slowly brought him a ladle. The boy drank it all in one go, water dripping from his chin, like he hadn't tasted moisture in days. Then he left, wordless, doing no harm. That was a mercy. Last time someone refused, the entire family vanished before dawn. By noon, the soldiers had made camp at the forest's edge. Villagers were ordered to bring food, anything. Wilted turnips, stale bread, even bones boiled more than once, they took it all. A young man named Luca accidentally dropped his sack of flour near the camp. The powder burst in the air, dusting a soldier's legs white. Without a word, the man drew his blade and sliced Luca's hand. The scream echoed across the fields, but no one dared move. Luca lay bleeding. His wife cried out. But there were no healers, no mercy, no gods that answered. That evening, smoke from some hearth drifted through the humid air. The soldiers drank, sang, told stories of burned villages and dead men. One boasted of roasting a dying horse over open flame. Another laughed about tying a spy to a post before a pack of starving dogs. Some young soldiers turned green but said nothing. This was life now, too broken for guilt, too far gone for tears. In the village, old Katia sat in shadows. She had lost both sons last year in a battle no one remembers. Her hut was a shell of charred wood and crumbling stone. Still, she stayed. If I leave, she muttered, I'll die on the road. If I stay, I die slowly. Her eyes were dry. She had cried herself empty. At night, the village went dark. No fires, no candles. Light invited danger. In the black, children were told to stop breathing if they heard footsteps. One mother clutched her feverish infant, praying it wouldn't cry. The last time a dog barked, soldiers entered the home and no one came out again. Death here didn't need a reason. It came like the winter wind, quiet, sudden, cruel. On the outskirts, an old soldier named Gavril leaned against a great oak. He had fought for over a decade, and no longer remembered why. His wife had died in a raid, his son taken at 15, now long lost. Gavril drank from a flask, then pulled out a tattered cloth embroidered with the name, Anika, his wife, whose memory faded like ink left in rain. Far off, an owl hooted. A dog howled from the village edge, a mournful sound like a farewell. No one kept track of the days anymore. They only knew that tomorrow would come, with moldy bread, gnawing hunger, and fear sinking deeper into bone. And in the ashes of dawn, if hope still existed, it was nothing more than a weary breath fading into the morning came not with light but with a shroud of gray that dulled the hills and pressed against the fields like a wet cloak. The rain had fallen quietly during the night, and now the earth was slick, the pathways between homes turned to sludge, and the thatch on every roof dripped with cold. Hunger greeted the villagers like an old enemy, one that knew each name and face. In the house of Marcin, the farmer who once had 5 oxen and 2 sons, only silence answered the growling of empty bellies. He sat cross-legged in the middle of the floor, sharpening a rusted blade with a stone too smooth to do much good. The fire had long gone out, and there was nothing left to burn except part of a broken stool. His wife, Linnea, lay on a bed of rags beside the wall, her breath shallow and slow. Her skin was pale, and her lips cracked. She had not eaten in 3 days, and Marcin feared she wouldn't survive the 4th. Their daughter, little Ilka, had curled up against her mother's legs for warmth. Her eyes were open, but she didn't speak anymore. Marcin stood and reached for the small cloth sack that once held dried beans. There was only dust inside. His mind drifted to the grain stores, long emptied by soldiers weeks ago. He had buried a pot of barley near the eastern fence, hoping to save it from looters, but when he dug for it yesterday, he found only broken clay and signs of scavengers. Whether it was men or animals, he couldn't say. All he knew was that the food was gone. He left the house with nothing but his knife. Outside, the village was still. The soldiers had moved on to the next hamlet that morning, leaving behind footprints, blood stains, and the stink of waste. Marcin walked past the well, past the house where Luka had bled out. The door hung open, swinging in the breeze. He did not look inside. He didn't want to see Luka's wife, or what might be left of her. At the edge of the woods, Marcin crouched low. He knew the game trails here. Once, this forest had been generous, rabbits, birds, even the occasional deer. But now, the animals had gone silent. He moved slowly, listening for rustling, for any sign of life. His stomach twisted in pain, and for a moment, he thought he might vomit though he had nothing in him. Then, he heard it, a faint crunch of leaves, the soft padding of feet. Marcin held his breath. A squirrel darted through the underbrush, small and fast, pausing on a branch just a few paces ahead. With shaking hands, he drew back his arm and flung the knife. It missed by a hand's width. The squirrel vanished into the trees, leaving him empty again. He slumped to the ground, head in his hands, fingers dirty and trembling. The blade was gone, so was the chance for meat. He sat in the mud for what felt like hours, until the clouds above thickened and rain began to fall again. Cold droplets slid down his neck, mixing with sweat. He thought of Linnea, of Ilka, of their hollow faces and sunken eyes. He couldn't return with nothing. His mind went to dark places, the houses of others, the cellar beneath the old chapel, even the dead horse rotting near the mill. Desperation had long eroded shame. As the rain turned heavier, he rose and made his way toward the chapel ruins. It had been burned months ago, after a skirmish left many dead on its steps. But some said the cellar still held preserved wine or salted fish. The stone door was half buried under soot and ash. Marcin grunted, pushing it open. Inside, it was cold and damp, the air thick with mildew. He stepped into the darkness, feeling his way down broken stairs. His foot struck something soft. He crouched low, reaching out, and pulled back in horror. A body, half decomposed, lay twisted on the floor. Rats scattered from the disturbance. Flies rose in a cloud. Marcin turned his face away, retching dry. He pushed past the corpse, deeper in. At the far wall, beneath broken shelves, he saw a jar. His heart pounded as he pulled it free. It was heavy. He opened it with frantic fingers. Pickled cabbage. Sour, moldy, but real. Food. He sank to the ground, hugging the jar to his chest like a treasure, tears spilling down his cheeks. He was crying, not for joy, but for what he had become, and what he would still do to survive. By the time he returned home, the rain had lightened. Ilka stirred at the sound of the door. Linnea opened her eyes, faintly. Marcin spooned out bits of the cabbage, ignoring the mold, whispering to them that it would be all right. That he would find more. That they would live. Outside, the wind whistled through the eaves, a mournful song. The war was still raging, just beyond the hills. But for that night, in a village forgotten by kings and gods, one man had found enough to see his family through another day. Another day of sorrow. Another day of surviving. Nothing more. The next day began with smoke, not the kind from hearths or forges, but the acrid, heavy smoke of something burning that shouldn't. Marcin woke to its stench, his body aching from cold and hunger. Ilka was still asleep, curled against her mother. Linnea was awake, barely, her eyes sunken and distant. Marcin touched her hand and felt how light it had become, like it belonged more to a shadow than a woman. He didn't speak. There were no words left to say that hadn't already lost their meaning. He stepped outside into a windless dawn. The village was smothered in silence, but from the western ridge, a black column rose into the pale sky. Another farmstead was burning. Perhaps it had been raided in the night. Perhaps the soldiers returned, or maybe bandits. It didn't matter who did it anymore, only what was left in their wake. Marcin watched for a while, then turned away. He didn't want to see which house it had been. Near the edge of the village, old Gavril was digging a grave. It was shallow, the earth too hard from frost to go deep. A boy lay beside it, covered in a worn cloth. Marcin didn't ask whose child it was. Names no longer mattered. There were too many dead and too few mourners. Gavril didn't speak, his weathered hands working the shovel with slow determination. His back was bent, his breath labored. Yet he dug on, because someone had to. I thought he might last the winter, Gavril muttered finally, almost to himself. He was stronger than most. Marcin nodded but said nothing. What comfort could he offer that hadn't been crushed by months of ruin? By mid-morning, the sky turned gray again. Villagers emerged from their homes in cautious steps, like animals sniffing the air for wolves. A girl of 14, her dress patched with different kinds of cloth, went door to door asking for milk for her baby brother. She received only silence, closed doors, and one whispered apology. The last goat in the village had been butchered the week before. In the square, a group gathered around a man named Aldwin. He had returned from the north, where he claimed the war was worse. Villages flattened, rivers red, churches turned to slaughterhouses. He told of soldiers stacking bodies like logs and burning them to ward off disease. He said the king's army had been routed and that the roads were now ruled by deserters and thieves. Some listened, some walked away. Marcin remained, watching Aldwin's lips move but barely hearing the words. What difference did it make if the war was worse elsewhere? It was already hell here. A scream shattered the moment. From behind the mill, a woman stumbled into view, clutching her stomach. Blood soaked her dress. She fell to her knees, gasping, then collapsed. Two men ran to her, one shouting for help, the other trying to press cloth to her wound. A boy, perhaps her son, stood frozen a few steps behind, staring wide-eyed at the pooling blood. She was attacked, someone whispered. One of the deserters. No one chased the attacker. No one knew where he'd gone, or dared follow if they did. Fear was stronger than justice now. The woman died before the sun reached its peak. The grave next to the boy's was widened to hold her. Gavril dug in silence. No priest came to bless her. No bell tolled. Just the sound of the shovel breaking earth. Marcin returned home with dirt on his boots and sorrow in his lungs. Linnea hadn't moved. Ilka sat beside her, humming a broken melody from the time when things were still whole. Marcin offered them the last of the cabbage, now sourer than before. Linnea ate nothing. Ilka took a few bites, then laid her head in her mother's lap. Later that night, thunder rolled over the hills. A storm was coming. Marcin climbed to the roof to patch a hole before the rain arrived. From up there, he could see far, the distant trees swaying, the smoke from the burned farmstead now gone, and the faint outline of riders on the ridge. Not soldiers. Not yet. But someone was coming. He climbed down slowly, hands stiff from cold. Inside, he found Linnea whispering in her sleep. Words he couldn't understand. Maybe dreams. Maybe prayers. He sat beside her and took her hand, thin and cold. Just a little longer, he said, mostly to himself. Outside, lightning flashed. The village held its breath again. Tomorrow would come, and with it, another struggle. Another death. Another grave. But for now, they endured, ragged, starved, and afraid, but still breathing. Still alive. The storm struck before dawn. It came with howling winds that tore at the thatched roofs and lashed the broken fences, with rain that fell in sheets heavy enough to drown a whisper. Thunder cracked the heavens apart, and lightning lit the village in terrible flashes, brief glimpses of suffering frozen in white. A child clinging to her mother in a leaking hut, a dog whimpering under an overturned cart, and the old chapel's ruins weeping smoke and rain like the wounds of a dying god. Marcin sat against the wall of his home, staring at the door as if it would burst open any moment. Beside him, Ilka slept curled in a wool blanket, thin as paper now, her limbs like sticks. Linnea no longer stirred when the thunder roared. Her breath was faint, but steady. Marcin had done what he could to keep her warm, but he knew her strength was draining by the hour. Then came the hooves. He heard them before anyone else did, muffled by rain but unmistakable. One. Then two. Then many. He rose to his feet and moved to the window, lifting the ragged cloth they used as a curtain. In the flicker of lightning, he saw them. Cloaked riders on dark horses, 10 at least, approaching from the southern road. No banners. No armor that glinted like the king's men. These were not soldiers. These were wolves in human skins. The alarm never came. There was no time. The riders entered the village like wraiths, silent and wet, swords already drawn. A man's scream cut through the night, followed by the clash of metal and the sound of breaking wood. Marcin didn't think. He grabbed Ilka, wrapped her tight, and whispered to her not to speak, not to move. He bent over Linnea and pressed a kiss to her cold forehead. Her eyes opened for just a moment. Hide, she breathed. Then he ran. Out the back door, into the dark. The storm swallowed them. Behind his house was the old well, now dry, covered by boards and overgrown weeds. He pried the boards free and lowered Ilka inside, handing her a folded cloak for warmth. Stay quiet, he said, his voice shaking. No matter what you hear, don't come out. She nodded, eyes wide with fear. Then he replaced the boards and piled straw on top to hide the entrance. He didn't know if it would be enough. He prayed to whatever God might still listen. From the front of the village came firelight. They were burning houses. The smell of smoke mixed with wet earth. He crept between sheds and fences, heart pounding, until he saw one of the raiders. The man wore a fur cloak soaked through with rain, and his blade was red even in the dark. He dragged a woman by her hair toward a cart. She screamed once before he struck her silent. Marcin's fists clenched. His blood rose, but he was no fighter. He had no sword, no armor, not even his knife, lost in the woods days ago. He turned back toward his house, hoping Linnea was still breathing, still unseen. But as he neared the wall, he heard voices, 2 raiders, speaking in low tones. This one's still alive. She's too weak to fight. Leave her. No, bring her. If she dies, we feed her to the dogs. Marcin's heart stopped. He moved without thought, picking up a broken shovel from beside the fence. He stepped around the corner and swung at the first man's back. The iron hit with a sickening crunch, and the man collapsed. The second turned, surprised, and Marcin shoved him back, slamming him against the wall. They struggled in the mud, slipping, choking, snarling. Marcin took a fist to the jaw, fell, then kicked the man's knee with all his strength. Bone cracked. The raider dropped. Marcin crawled to Linnea, who lay on the floor as pale as death. Her eyes fluttered open, but she didn't speak. Hold on, he whispered, lifting her gently. He didn't know where to go. The woods were full of thieves. The village was burning. He thought of the old granary, now half collapsed, forgotten even by the soldiers. He carried her through the rain, step by step, blood running from his lip, heart screaming in his chest. The smoke choked him. The fire burned behind them. But he made it. He placed her gently on the floor of the granary, away from the wind. She was still breathing. That was enough. He stayed by her side through the rest of the night, watching as the sky turned from black to gray, as the screams faded, as the rain finally stopped. By morning, half the village was gone. Burned. Torn apart. The riders had taken food, tools, lives. They hadn't found Ilka. They hadn't found the old granary. Not yet. Marcin stumbled back to the well, breath ragged, every limb aching. He uncovered the boards. Ilka blinked up at him, pale and frightened. It's over, he said. For now. He didn't tell her what he had seen. He didn't tell her that half their neighbors were dead. He didn't tell her that Linnea's breath had grown so soft he feared it would stop any moment. Instead, he lifted her into his arms, and together they returned to the place that used to be their home. Tomorrow would bring more suffering. The war would not end. But tonight, they had survived the storm. And in the ruins, in the smoke and mud and silence, survival was the only victory left. The smell of smoke lingered for days. It clung to the clothes they wore, to their hair, to every splintered beam of the houses that still stood. It stained the sky, even when the sun returned, casting a gray haze that never quite lifted. Marcin sat beside Linnea, who now barely opened her eyes, her breath as thin as mist. He spooned water into her mouth drop by drop, but she didn't swallow much. Ilka sat on the floor in silence, hugging her knees. The fire that had once danced behind her eyes had gone out, and what remained was too old for a child to carry. The village was quieter than ever before. Too quiet. The riders had taken everything they could. They had stripped the mill of its grinding stone. They had broken every pot they didn't steal. They had dragged 4 men away, tied behind horses, and no one had seen them since. In the days that followed, no one spoke of revenge. There was no strength for it. What little life remained in the village was focused on one task only: survival. Gavril was still alive. He had buried his son the morning after the raid, and now he dug for others. 4 more graves by the chapel. Then 2 more beside the old well. No markers. No names. Just dirt and silence. Marcin helped him dig one of them, for a girl named Mira who had been found behind the tavern, her throat cut. She couldn't have been more than 17. Neither of them spoke as they worked. Words had become useless. The act of digging, of burying, of surviving, that was the only language left between men. Later that day, Marcin returned to the granary to check on Linnea. She hadn't moved. Her skin had taken on a gray pallor, and her lips barely parted as she whispered something he could not hear. Ilka pressed her forehead to her mother's and whispered back, as if she understood. "We should move her," Marcin said softly, though he didn't believe she could be moved far. "Somewhere warmer." Ilka just nodded, but didn't rise. She stayed curled next to Linnea, as though her small body could hold her mother to life. Marcin looked around the granary. The floor was cold stone, and the roof sagged dangerously, but it was still shelter. He used old sacks and bits of straw to make a bed that might be warmer. He carried Linnea there and wrapped her in his cloak. That night, the wind returned. It blew through the cracks in the wood and whistled through the empty windows like a ghost. Marcin stood guard by the door, a sharpened stick in his hands. Not much of a weapon, but it was all he had. Every creak made his heart jump. He knew they might return. Bandits. Deserters. Or worse, men who had nothing left to lose. But they didn't come. Instead came a visitor Marcin didn't expect. Just before dawn, a figure appeared outside the granary door, carrying a torch wrapped in cloth to keep the flame low. Marcin stepped forward, ready to fight, but the figure raised one hand. "It's me," the voice croaked. "Aldwin." Marcin narrowed his eyes. "Why are you here?" "I found something," Aldwin said. "Something you need to see." Marcin looked back at Ilka and Linnea. "I can't leave them. I'll stay with them," Aldwin said quickly. "Just for a while. You'll want to see this." Reluctantly, Marcin nodded. He handed Ilka the stick. "If anything happens, I'll scream," she said softly, gripping the weapon with both hands. Marcin followed Aldwin through the ruins of the village, past the scorched barns and the collapsed chapel, to a spot by the northern stream. There, in the reeds, was a cart. Broken, muddy, and half sunken into the earth. But in the back of the cart, hidden beneath a moldy canvas, were sacks. Grain. Not much, perhaps enough to last a family 2 weeks, but it was something. Marcin stared, not daring to believe. "Why didn't they take it?" he asked. "Looks like one of the wheels broke," Aldwin said. "They must have left it in the rain and forgot." Marcin opened one of the sacks. The grain was damp, but not spoiled. "We need to hide this." Aldwin nodded. "I've told no one else." Together, they rolled the sacks from the cart and carried them one by one to the remains of an old cellar beneath a burned-out house. It took hours. Their hands bled. Their backs ached. But by sunrise, the grain was hidden. "We'll ration it," Aldwin said. "Give some to the children, the sick. The rest we keep." Marcin didn't reply. He was already thinking of Linnea. Of Ilka. Of making bread again, something he hadn't done in weeks. When he returned to the granary, Ilka was still awake. Linnea hadn't moved. Marcin knelt beside her and took her hand. "Hold on," he whispered. "We have food now." But her fingers didn't curl around his. Her lips didn't part. By noon, she was gone. Marcin sat in silence. He didn't cry. Ilka didn't either. They had run out of tears long ago. They buried her beside the granary, where the frost hadn't yet hardened the ground. No ceremony. No final words. Just dirt and a stone. Ilka sat by the grave all night. Marcin sat beside her. The war still raged somewhere beyond the woods. But in this ruined village, the battle was no longer about soldiers or kings. It was about holding on. One breath at a time. One day at a time. And now, one grave at a time. The morning after Linnea's burial arrived quietly, without thunder or smoke, just a dull, wet cold that settled into the bones. Marcin rose from the floor of the granary, his back stiff, his limbs heavy. For a moment he forgot where he was, then the smell of damp straw and Ilka's quiet breathing brought it all rushing back. He looked over at her, curled on the cloak where her mother had lain. Her eyes were open but empty. They hadn't spoken since the burial. Marcin stepped outside, the ground slick beneath his boots. The sky was low and gray, and a fine mist clung to the air. He knelt beside the grave, no cross, no name, just a mound of earth pressed down by the night's rain, and laid his hand on the cold stone he'd found to mark it. He had nothing else to give her. Not even flowers. Nothing grew anymore. When he returned to the granary, Ilka was sitting upright. "Is there bread?" she asked, voice hoarse. It struck him, how long it had been since he'd heard her speak with want. That single word lit a dying ember in his chest. "Bread. Yes," he said softly. "I think we can make some." He gathered his tools, a broken bowl, a cracked jug, and a dull knife. Then he returned to the hidden cellar where the grain lay in sacks. The frost had crept in overnight, but the grain was still good. Not much, but enough. He filled a cloth pouch and returned to the granary, where he crushed the kernels on a flat stone. His hands bled before he finished, but he didn't stop. Ilka watched him work, silent, her small hands clasped in her lap. He mixed the flour with water from the stream. There was no salt, no yeast, just flour and water and heat. He built a fire in the old granary hearth, coaxing flames from wet wood with patience and flint. The fire smoked heavily, but it was warm. He placed the flatbread on a stone near the flames and watched it brown. When it was done, he broke it in half and gave the larger piece to Ilka. She chewed slowly. No joy, no smile, just need. But after the first bite, she looked at him. "It's warm," she said. He nodded, biting into his half. It was coarse and flavorless, but it filled the space where emptiness had lived for too long. They ate together, silent but no longer separate. Later, they walked the village. Marcin had heard that the chapel bell had fallen. He wanted to see it for himself. The church had burned months ago, when the first soldiers came through, but its bell tower had somehow survived. Now, the tower had finally collapsed, and the bell lay in the mud like a relic of a forgotten god. It was cracked down one side, its voice forever silenced. A few villagers gathered around it. Gavril was there, and Aldwin. A woman Marcin didn't know. No one spoke. They only stared, as if mourning not just the bell, but the last thread that had connected them to the world before. The bell fell, Gavril muttered. "Now we have nothing left to ring for the dead. We bury them," Marcin said. "That's enough." He looked at Aldwin, who nodded. "We've begun to ration the grain," Aldwin said. "There's not much. Maybe enough for a week, if no one finds it." "We'll find more," Marcin said, though he had no idea where or how. The days that followed passed in a rhythm of hunger and watchfulness. Marcin took Ilka into the forest again, staying far from the old roads. They gathered roots and moss, scraped bark from pine trees to boil for broth. Once, they found a dead deer, frozen stiff, half-eaten by wolves. Marcin took what was left of the meat and gave silent thanks. Back in the village, others did the same. Quiet scavengers. Broken people with broken tools, combing the land for scraps. There were no more fields. The war had seen to that. But there were still things to find. Still a few chickens left hidden under floorboards. Still a patch of wild onions near the marsh. On the fifth night, someone knocked on the granary door. Marcin opened it cautiously, stick in hand, ready. It was Gavril. He looked tired, more than usual. His hands trembled. "My daughter," he said. "She's sick. Fever. Do you have anything?" Marcin looked at Ilka, then at the small sack of herbs they'd collected. He handed over a portion. "It's not much," he said. "It's more than I had," Gavril whispered. He turned to go, then paused. "Thank you." Marcin closed the door slowly. Ilka said nothing. She just watched the fire. That night, Marcin dreamed of Linnea. She stood in a golden field, arms outstretched, the sun behind her. No blood, no sickness, just wind and warmth. She said nothing, but smiled. He woke with tears on his cheeks and the smell of smoke in his nose. Outside, the world remained unchanged. But inside, Ilka was already kneeling by the fire, grinding more grain. She looked at him, not smiling, but alive. And somehow, that was enough to face another day. It came without warning, in the deep hours of the night. At first, Marcin thought it was ash. He had seen so much of it lately, drifting from the ruins of chimneys and the corpses of barns. But when he stepped outside the granary, the air was silent, and the flakes that fell upon his arm did not stain, it melted slowly into his sleeve. Snow. It was beautiful in its way, softening the sharp edges of ruin. The broken chapel, the cratered roads, the shattered fences, now all covered in a pale, forgiving white. But Marcin did not feel wonder. Only dread. Snow meant cold. Cold meant hunger. And they were already too close to death. Inside, Ilka stirred in her sleep, pulling the cloak tighter around her shoulders. The fire had burned down to embers, and Marcin had no more wood. He returned at dawn with arms full of frozen branches, his breath clouding before him, his fingers red and stiff. Ilka had awakened and was pressing her hands toward the dead coals as if wishing fire into them. He fed the wood in slowly, patiently striking flint to steel. The spark caught, the flame returned. There would be heat today. Tomorrow, he did not know. By mid-morning, the snow had thickened into a storm. Visibility dropped to only a few paces. Marcin wrapped Ilka in 2 cloaks and carried her to the hidden cellar where the grain lay. He took only 1 sack. Just enough for 2 days. As he sealed the entrance again, he felt something shift beneath his foot. A trail, fresh. Someone else had been there. He said nothing to Ilka. They returned to the granary, and he reinforced the door with rocks and a broken beam. Ilka asked him once, "Will they come again?" He didn't answer. They both knew. That night, the wind howled like wolves, and snow piled high against the walls. The fire flickered weakly. They ate bread again, with boiled pine bark. Neither of them spoke much. Their words were being saved, like food. On the 3rd day of snow, Gavril came stumbling to the granary. His coat was soaked through, and he leaned heavily on a stick. Marcin pulled him inside. "She's gone," Gavril said, slumping to the floor. Marcin knew he meant his daughter. "I did what I could. But her fever," Gavril trailed off. Ilka gave him her own piece of bread. That night, they sat in silence. 3 of them now. 3 survivors with no stories left to share. The next day brought no relief. The storm had frozen the village solid. Marcin's boots cracked when he walked. He had to punch through ice to reach the stream. When he returned to the granary, he found footprints around it. New. More than 1 set. They were being watched. That evening, Aldwin came with a warning. "I saw 2 men near the woods," he said, eyes wide. "Not villagers. One had a bow. They're looking for food. Then the grain isn't safe," Aldwin finished. "We need to move it." So that night, under the cover of snow and darkness, Marcin and Aldwin moved the sacks. They took only half, hidden beneath the old blacksmith's forge, buried under stones. The other half remained in the cellar, bait, perhaps. A trap. Or a sacrifice. Ilka stayed with Gavril while they worked. When Marcin returned, soaked and trembling, he found her asleep on the floor beside the old man, her hand in his. She looked so small. That night, Marcin didn't sleep. He sat at the door with a stick in one hand and a knife in the other. The hours passed slowly, the cold creeping through the cracks. Just before dawn, he heard it, a soft crunch in the snow. Then another. Someone outside. He waited, heart pounding. Then a voice. Whispered. Unfamiliar. "They've got it here. In the forge, I saw them." Another voice, deeper. "Tonight then." The footsteps faded. Marcin sat there until light returned. He told no one what he'd heard. But that morning, when Ilka reached for bread, he gave her double her portion. And when Gavril asked what was wrong, Marcin only said, "Eat what you can." Today. That afternoon, he sharpened his stick to a point and waited for the sun to fall. He didn't know if they would live through the night. But he would not give them up without a fight. The sun sank like a dying ember, casting long orange streaks through the broken windows of the granary. Shadows stretched across the floor, cold and long like the days they'd endured. Marcin stood by the door, the pointed stick in his hand, the knife tucked into his boot. He had wrapped himself in layers of ragged wool and damp leather, but the cold still found ways to creep into his bones. Ilka was quiet. She sat with her back against the wall, watching the fire, but her eyes were not on the flames. She was listening. Like him, Gavril dozed beside her, too weak to sit upright for long. His breath rattled softly. The death of his daughter had stolen more from him than illness ever could. Outside, the wind died. The world held its breath. Then, just after full dark, the snow crunched again. This time closer. Slower. Marcin's grip tightened. He moved to the crack in the wall and peered out. Shapes. 2 of them, shadows in the snowfall. Men. One with a bow slung across his back, the other carrying a short axe. They were heading toward the forge. Marcin slipped out the back of the granary, snow soaking his boots in seconds. He crouched low and crept along the collapsed fence, his breath hidden by the cold. Every movement was a risk, every sound a betrayal. He reached the forge and waited. The men pried open the loose stones. One chuckled softly when he saw the grain. "Told you," the axe man whispered. "Enough to live like kings for a month." The one with the bow turned suddenly, staring into the dark. "Thought I heard something." Marcin didn't wait. He lunged from the shadows, plunging the stick deep into the axe man's back. The man screamed and fell forward into the snow, the sack of grain spilling beside him. The bowman turned, already reaching for his weapon, but Marcin was too close. He slammed into him, driving the man back against the forge wall. They struggled in silence, breath steaming, fists flailing. Then, a crack. The bowman struck Marcin across the jaw with a gloved fist. Marcin stumbled. Pain flashed white. He saw the man draw a knife. But before he could raise it, a stone struck him from behind. Ilka. She stood in the snow barefoot, her hands red from the cold, another rock clutched and ready. The bowman turned, stunned. That was all Marcin needed. He surged up, drove his knife into the man's thigh, then again into his chest. The man gasped, collapsed, and did not move again. Silence. The only sound was the wind, rising once more. Marcin turned to Ilka. "You shouldn't be out here." "I heard them," she said. "I wasn't going to let them take it." He wanted to scold her, to wrap her in blankets, to hide her from the world. But he knew better. She wasn't a child anymore. Not truly. Not after all this. They dragged the bodies behind the forge. No time for graves. No strength. Then they gathered the spilled grain and carried it back, sack by sack, breathless and shaking. Inside the granary, Gavril stared at them wide-eyed. He didn't ask questions. Just nodded grimly. Later that night, they sat by the fire. Marcin's jaw was swollen, and Ilka's feet were blue with cold. He wrapped them gently in cloth and warmed them by the flames. She said nothing for a long time. Then, "I was scared." "I know," he replied softly. "So was I. But I hit him." "You saved me," Marcin said, voice thick. She nodded, but her eyes were distant. "Do you think they'll send more?" Marcin stared into the fire. Yes. She didn't cry. He didn't either. There were no tears left. Only fire. Only snow. And the beating of hearts still alive. That night, Marcin kept watch again. Knife in hand. Every sound outside sent a jolt through him. But no one came. In the morning, snow still blanketed the earth, stained now in patches of red. But the grain was safe. The fire was lit. They were still breathing. For now, that was enough. The storm passed. The sky cleared into a dull gray dome that stretched endlessly above the broken world. Snow crusted over the land, hard and cold beneath the early sun, and the village lay frozen, silent, white, and dead. No birds sang. No carts rumbled. The war had stolen even the sound of life. Marcin stood outside the granary, his breath rising in slow, tired clouds. He stared at the trail left in the snow, his and Ilka's, from dragging the grain back. Just beside it, the patch where the two bodies lay hidden was marked by a red streak that refused to disappear, even under the new snow. He didn't feel guilt. Just emptiness. Inside, Ilka helped Gavril drink broth. The old man had worsened in the night. His hands trembled so badly he couldn't hold the cup. Ilka steadied it for him, her voice soft, coaxing. Marcin watched them from the doorway, then turned back toward the forge. He needed more wood, more kindling, anything that would keep the fire alive through the next night. He made his way through the snow-covered village, passing homes with roofs collapsed under weight, doors blown open by wind or war. He stopped at the baker's house, burnt out months ago but still standing. He broke apart a shattered beam and carried it back over his shoulder. On the way, he passed the chapel ruins again. The bell was gone, only a hole in the snow where it had rested. He froze. Someone had taken it, or something. He checked the trail. Faint impressions of sled marks. Deep prints, boots, heavy ones. That meant someone else was still near. Or had returned. Back at the granary, he piled the wood by the fire. Ilka looked up. "There's more people," he said quietly. They were near the chapel. They took the bell. "Why would anyone take a bell?" she asked, frowning. "To melt. Or trade. Or worship. I don't know. But it means they're close." Ilka nodded. then looked down at Gavril, whose head lolled to the side. He's not getting better, she whispered. Marcin knelt beside him. Gavril's breath came in shallow rasps, his eyes fluttering beneath thin lids. There's nothing left to give him, Marcin said. Only warmth. That night, the fire was stoked high. They used the good wood. They didn't sleep. Gavril murmured in his fever, names Marcin didn't recognize. His wife. His daughter. Maybe people from before. Maybe ghosts. By morning, he was gone. Ilka wept, not loudly, but with her whole body trembling. Marcin dug the grave alone, his hands raw and bleeding by the time it was deep enough. He found a small cross in the ruins of a fence and placed it above the mound. No name, again, but it was something. After the burial, Marcin sat in the granary with Ilka. They shared the last of the broth. Neither spoke of what would come next. Then, as the wind picked up, they heard something new, a bell. A soft, distant chime from the woods. One note. Then silence. Ilka's face went pale. Marcin stood slowly, heart racing. No one had heard that bell for months. Not since the chapel fell. He stepped outside. The sound came again. Once. Then again. 2 notes. Ilka followed him, wrapped in the too large cloak. What is it? She asked. I don't know, he replied. But someone wants us to hear them. They walked to the edge of the trees. Nothing moved. The bell rang a 3rd time. Marcin raised his voice. Who's there? No answer. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. A woman. Thin, draped in black furs, a child clinging to her side. We heard there was food here, she called. Her voice was rough, cracked by cold. We have nothing left. Marcin said nothing at first. Ilka looked up at him. We can't leave them, she whispered. Marcin's mind raced. More mouths. Less food. But also more hands. More eyes. And he saw the child's face, thin, pale, blue-lipped like Ilka had been. He nodded. They brought them in. The woman's name was Dagna. Her son was Emil. She had fled from the east, from a village even more broken than theirs. Her husband had died in autumn, ambushed by deserters. She had wandered for weeks. That night, they shared fire and flatbread again. Ilka gave Emil her portion. Marcin didn't stop her. The family had grown again. And so had the burden. But for now, there was warmth. For now, the snow stayed outside. And that was enough to survive one more day. The snow did not let up. It clung to the village like death itself, soft, cold, silent. Each morning brought more of it. More weight on the roof. More whiteness to bury the memory of the world that had once lived there. And now there were 4 of them in the granary. 4 breathing mouths, 4 shivering bodies, and only enough grain for perhaps 5 more days. Marcin was tired in a way sleep could not fix. Each sunrise came later, each fire harder to start. The cold had slipped into his bones like a second skin, and it refused to leave. He awoke each morning not with dread, but with numbness. He felt no panic, no fear. Only the weary rhythm of survival. Ilka and Emil sat close by the fire, speaking in quiet whispers like siblings born of ash. She had taken to brushing his hair, singing soft songs in a voice nearly lost to frost. Dagna helped with chores, though her body trembled constantly. Her hands had gone purple at the fingers. She never spoke of it. Neither did Marcin. What could be said? The morning of the 10th day began with smoke on the horizon. Marcin saw it first, just as the sun crept above the broken steeple of the ruined chapel. A black plume, thin but unmistakable, curling into the sky beyond the eastern ridge. Not a cooking fire. Too large. Someone else was burning. He called Dagna, and her face darkened. That's where I came from, she whispered. The village of Holton. Who would burn it now? Marcin asked. She looked away. The ones who burned it before. Or the ones who finished what the war started. He didn't ask more. He didn't want to know. That afternoon, they rationed the grain again. 1 ladle of mush per person. No bark to stretch it. No herbs. Just hot water and powder. It was food in name alone. Ilka gave her share to Emil when she thought no one was looking. Marcin saw it. He didn't stop her. That night, Dagna collapsed near the fire. Marcin lifted her, shocked by how light she was. She felt like twigs beneath his arms. She opened her eyes once, murmured something in a language he didn't know, and passed into sleep again. Ilka pressed cloths to her forehead. She's burning. No, Marcin said. She's freezing. The next morning, Dagna could no longer stand. Her eyes were glassy, her breath shallow. She said only one word, Emil. Ilka sat with the boy while Marcin and Dagna waited for the end. It came quietly, without scream or moan. Just a single breath that didn't return. Marcin buried her beside Gavril. The ground was frozen deep now, and it took him nearly all day. When it was done, he left no cross. Just a stone. That night, Emil didn't cry. He stared into the fire, wide-eyed, his small fists clenched in silence. Ilka held him, sang to him again. The next day, Marcin went out to the woods. He found deer tracks, weeks old, but still visible. Hope flickered. He followed them east, into the forest, farther than he had dared in months. The trees were dense here. Silent. Snow clung to every branch, weighing them down. After an hour, he found blood. Frozen, dark. Then he found the carcass. It was not a deer. It was a man, face down in the snow, half covered in ice, his clothes torn and black with frost. A wound on his back, deep and jagged. He had been carrying something. Marcin found a satchel nearby. Inside, one loaf of frozen bread, a rusted tin of salt, and a child's wooden toy. A fox had taken most of his face. Marcin turned away. He took the bread and salt, buried the body under snow and pine. He walked back in silence, through the long tunnels of cold and bark. When he returned, Ilka met him at the door, her face pale. "Someone's watching us," she whispered. Emil saw them. From the loft, Marcin climbed the broken ladder, peered through the slats. There, on the edge of the trees, a figure, cloaked, standing still, too far to identify, too close to ignore. They were not alone. Marcin climbed down. "We may need to leave soon," he said. "Where would we go?" He didn't answer. They all knew the truth. There was nowhere else. That night, they huddled by the fire, all three of them. Ilka clutched Emil tight. Marcin sat with his knife drawn, eyes on the door. Outside, the wind howled. The watcher did not return. But neither did the fear leave. Survival was no longer living. It was waiting to see what would die next. It began with a noise, a sharp, sudden crack that split the silence like a whip. Marcin jolted upright, heart hammering, the blade in his hand before his eyes could even adjust to the darkness. Ilka gasped. Emil whimpered and buried his face in her side. Another crack. Not thunder. Not fire. Wood. Something, or someone, was testing the granary. The fire had died to embers, but enough light flickered to cast long shadows on the walls. Marcin crept toward the door, listening. Nothing. Just the wind. Just the cold. Then, like breath on glass, a voice. Open. One word. Low. Male. Spoken in the tongue of their own people, but hollow, broken by the chill. Ilka stiffened, her hands tightening around Emil. Marcin motioned for silence, then leaned against the door and called out, "Who are you?" No answer. Then a whisper again, closer. "We saw your fire. We know you're in there." This time, more than one voice. Marcin moved back, heart pounding. "Two at least. Maybe more. Please," came another voice. A woman this time. "Weary. Starved. We're cold. We have children." Ilka looked at him, desperate. "What if they're like us?" Marcin didn't answer. He couldn't. He remembered the ones who had begged at the forge weeks before, only to draw blades. Remembered the blood in the snow. The cries. "I can't risk it," he whispered. Ilka stood. "You can't risk them," she said softly, pointing to Emil. "But they might be her. They might be me." Marcin hesitated, then moved toward the door. Slowly, he lifted the wooden bar and cracked it open an inch. White snow, black night, and faces. Three of them, gaunt, pale, frostbitten. A man, a woman, and a child no older than Emil. All wrapped in patchwork fur and linen, eyes wide with hunger and desperation. Marcin opened the door wider. "Just the three of you." The man nodded. "We came from the north. The castle fell weeks ago. We've walked since." Ilka brought them in. The child could barely stand. The woman collapsed to her knees in gratitude, crying silently. Marcin closed the door and barred it again. They shared the last of the bread from the dead man's pack. No one spoke of where it came from. The granary felt tighter now. More breath, less space, but also more warmth. The man's name was Petras. His wife, Luda. Their daughter, Kaya. They had watched their keep burn and their family scatter. The war had left them with only one direction, south. Where are you headed? Marcin asked him quietly that night. Petrus laughed bitterly. Anywhere not on fire. The next day, Ilka and Luda boiled snow to wash the new wounds. Kaya slept all day beside Emil, their heads touching. They had known each other only hours and clung like lifelong siblings. Marcin stood guard with Petrus that night. They watched the tree line. Marcin asked, "You saw anyone else on the way here?" Petrus nodded. "Several. Most didn't look twice. But some followed. Shadows in the trees. We moved fast." Marcin didn't like that. It meant more were out there. Watching. Waiting. Starving. He fortified the granary as best he could. Blocked the lower windows with planks. Built a second door using scraps from the forge. Petrus helped. But they both knew, if more came, they wouldn't hold. That night, Kaya woke screaming. Ilka rushed to her side. "What is it?" The girl shook and pointed at the ceiling. "I saw someone." Marcin climbed to the loft, knife ready. Nothing. But a small sound caught his ear. Drip, drip. A crack in the roof, hidden by snow, now melting slowly in the heat of their fire. The ice was breaking. Spring would come soon. But not fast enough. He patched the hole as best he could. Came down, sat by the fire again. Ilka stared into the flames. "What happens when we run out again?" she asked. "We don't," he answered. She looked at him. "You sound sure." "I'm not," he admitted. "But I want Emil and Kaya to see a spring. Even just one." Ilka nodded slowly. Then asked, "And after that?" Marcin had no answer. Only silence. And the soft sound of snow beginning to melt, like tears falling through a wooden roof. The warmth that promised spring came slowly, creeping through the days like a whisper. It did not soften the world, only change the rhythm of its cruelty. The snow melted just enough to turn the roads to mud, the fields to pits of rot, and the air to a damp, bone-chilling mist. Inside the granary, the fire flickered low, stretched too thin for too many. Marcin awoke before the others. The dreams had become worse. Fire, screaming, iron on flesh. He shook them off and stepped outside, sword in hand, breath misting in the morning gloom. The snow around the granary had thinned into dirty slush, exposing the earth below, gray, soggy, and pockmarked with prints. Some were theirs, some weren't. He knelt to examine a trail. Heavy boots. Fresh. 3 sets. Not from his group. Not old enough to fade with the thaw. Whoever left them had passed by in the night. He returned inside and barred the door behind him. Petrus was already awake, nursing his arm. He had burned it 2 days ago trying to shift a flaming log. "Visitors?" Petrus asked with quiet dread. "Not yet," Marcin replied. "But soon." Rations were gone. They had boiled the last moldy kernels 2 nights ago. Hunger lingered like a fifth shadow among them, growing heavier with each breath. Ilka tried to smile that day, playing a silent hand game with Kaya and Emil. It was a child's game, one she remembered from before the war. Kaya laughed once. Just once. It sounded like something sacred. But the adults knew the truth. No one was laughing tomorrow. That afternoon, Marcin and Petrus set out toward the edge of the forest. The old root cellar beneath the ruins of the blacksmith's house had not been checked in weeks. Maybe rats hadn't eaten everything. The air outside was heavy with thaw. The woods dripped around them, dark branches shedding snow like dying skin. Mud sucked at their boots with every step. They found the cellar half collapsed. The wooden door hung loose, black with mold, but it opened with effort. The smell struck first, rotten damp, and something sour. Inside, only 2 things remained. A half sack of spoiled barley and a child's skull. Petrus turned away, gagging. Marcin covered it with earth. Said no words. Words were useless here. They took the barley anyway. That night, they boiled it into mush, scraping mold from the top. Ilka fed the children first. Emil hesitated, then ate. Kaya cried silently but chewed. The adults didn't touch it. Later, Marcin sat with Ilka by the fire. "You still believe in surviving?" she asked. He thought a long time before answering. "I believe in trying," he said. She looked at him, and for a moment, he thought she might kiss him. But instead, she whispered, "I dreamed of a river. Green banks. Flowers." He said nothing. There were no rivers here. Only ice. At midnight, the dogs came. No one had seen them in weeks. They arrived silent, shadows with eyes. Starved. Wild. A pack of 7, moving like ghosts through the fog. One leapt at the granary door. The sound brought everyone awake. Children screamed. Petrus grabbed the iron poker. Marcin threw open the door and slashed at the first shape he saw. Blood sprayed the snow. A second dog lunged. Petrus drove it back, roaring. Marcin sliced at the air, missing teeth by inches. Ilka pulled the children to the loft. One dog broke through. Small. Fast. It darted past them, biting at shadows, mad with hunger. Marcin turned and drove his blade down through its back. A sickening crunch. The others fled. Panting, Marcin stood over the corpse. Emil stared down from the loft, eyes wide with terror. "We're not safe anymore," Ilka whispered. Marcin nodded. The blood soaked into the thawing ground. In the morning, they skinned the dog. Ilka cried the whole time, but she helped. They boiled the meat over the fire. It smelled wrong, like burnt hair and iron. But they ate. Even the children. They chewed in silence. This was how it was now. The thaw had not brought mercy. Only monsters. And the question that hung over every quiet breath: how much longer could they keep this flickering candle of life lit before the darkness swallowed them whole? The thaw was in full retreat by the time the first smoke rose over the southern hills. No longer creeping, the warmth of early spring now galloped through the land, tearing away what the snow had hidden: bodies half buried, shattered tools, blackened wood where once stood homes. The rot emerged, and with it, the stench of death. Marcin saw the smoke just after dawn. A thick column, rising heavy and dark, too steady to be a cooking fire. Too dark to be from wet wood. "They've come again," he said aloud. Petrus joined him on the roof. He was paler these days, coughing often. The burn on his arm had not healed, and it festered now, swollen and red. "Infection. Raiders?" he asked, not needing an answer. Marcin nodded. "Or deserters. They'll come this way." Yes. There were no plans left to make. No walls to build, no illusions to cling to. The granary was barely a shell. It had served its purpose, kept them breathing through the worst of the cold. But spring meant movement, and movement meant danger. Staying here was death. Inside, Ilka was packing the little they had: blankets, a pot, a scrap of salted dog meat they hadn't yet touched. Kaya and Emil slept curled together, thin as twigs, their cheeks sunken and still. "We leave at first light tomorrow," Marcin told her. She looked up, fear already swelling in her throat. "Where?" "South. The river. If it's not flooded, we might follow it to the marshes. Maybe even find other survivors." Ilka hesitated. "And if we don't?" He didn't answer. They all knew. That night, the fire burned low and quiet. No stories. No songs. Only the crackle of dry wood and the sound of breathing too shallow to be restful. Emil had nightmares again. He woke crying, but made no sound, only clutched Kaya tighter. Ilka ran fingers through his hair and hummed a lullaby no one remembered the words to. Petrus coughed blood into his sleeve when he thought no one watched. Marcin watched. He didn't say a thing. When morning came, there was no sun. Only gray mist, curling through the trees like ghosts. They moved quietly, children wrapped in cloaks, supplies tied in cloth and rope. Marcin carried the blade and a hatchet. Ilka had a broken bow with no string. Petrus had nothing but pain. They passed the forge, blackened, skeletal. The anvil still stood, cracked from frost. The memory of Gavril's body drifted behind Marcin like a shadow. He touched the corner of the ruined chimney as they passed. The woods greeted them with silence. No birds. No wind. Just the slow drip of melting frost and the occasional creak of shifting trees. Half a mile south, they saw the first sign. A body hanging from a tree. A woman, stripped of clothing, her hands bound. Kaya screamed. Ilka held her tight and covered her eyes. Emil stared, unmoving. Marcin cut her down. He didn't know why. He laid her in the snow, face to the sky, and closed her eyes. They moved faster after that. By midday, Petrus stumbled. Marcin turned in time to catch him before he fell, but the older man shoved him away. "No," he gasped. "Keep going. I'll slow you." "We're not leaving anyone," Ilka said firmly. But Petrus shook his head, smiling faintly. "I've seen my spring. It was your fire, that night we found you. That was enough." Marcin clenched his fists. But Petrus was right. He couldn't walk anymore. Ilka left him half a loaf of bread and a knife. He laughed at the knife. "This won't stop them." "No," she said softly. "But it might help you leave before they arrive." They left him there, beneath a leaning tree. He sat with his back to the trunk, watching the sky. Kaya kept looking back, her small mouth trembling. Ilka didn't let go of her hand once. They walked until the trees thinned and the ground sloped gently downward. There, at last, was the river. Wide, cold, moving with purpose. Marcin felt his knees weaken. Ilka cried. They drank until their bellies ached. Then they followed it south, into the unknown. The land was broken, but the river still flowed. And maybe, just maybe, it could carry them beyond war. Beyond hunger. Beyond the graves they carried in silence. They followed the river for days. At first, it was simple, a compass made of water and will. The current flowed south, and so did they. But the land beside it was no promised sanctuary. The banks were choked with broken branches and the drowned, bodies tangled in reeds like discarded sacks. The river gave life, yes, but it took just as much. Kaya stopped speaking the second day. She walked with her eyes down, holding Emil's hand, but her voice was locked away behind something too deep for words. Emil, who once asked endless questions, said nothing too. They were quiet in the way old soldiers are quiet, small, but broken already. Ilka sang under her breath sometimes. Lullabies with no words, melodies from childhood. They didn't lift the silence, but they pushed back the edge of despair. Marcin let her lead the children, staying behind with the hatchet, watching the trees, counting the crows. They passed through the remnants of a village on the third morning. It was no more than a cluster of stone chimneys jutting from black soil, as if the homes had melted away. One wall still stood, scorched but upright. Ilka approached it and ran her fingers over the marks etched in the stone. Claw marks. Deep ones. Inside what remained of a barn, they found the remains of a fire, cold now, but recent. Marcin sifted through the ashes with the blade's tip and pulled out a charred doll's head. Someone had been here, not long ago, and they had not stayed. They slept that night in the shell of the barn, walls half standing, wind howling through the gaps. Marcin made no fire. The scent of burning could be followed for miles. They ate what was left of the dog meat, bitter and dry. No one complained. Hunger was no longer a voice, it was a part of them, like ribs or bones. That night, Marcin woke to a sound. Breathing. Not Ilka. Not the children. He stood slowly, hand tight around the hatchet, and moved to the doorway. A figure stood near the riverbank. Tall. Still. Watching. He stepped forward into the mist. "Who are you?" he called, low but clear. No answer. Just the wind. Then the figure turned, and was gone. Vanished into the trees like a dream ending too soon. Marcin stood there a long while. The next day, the rain came. A cold, endless drizzle that soaked their clothes and slowed their steps. The river swelled, covering the narrow path. They pressed through muddy flats and sharp stones. Marcin carried Kaya on his back when her feet bled. Ilka's lips cracked and bled from the cold. Emil coughed at night, deep and rattling. But still, they moved. They passed a burned-out chapel with iron bells melted into twisted shapes. The altar had been shattered. Someone had painted symbols on the stone walls, red and black, a language none of them knew. Ilka wouldn't let the children look. They walked faster after that. On the seventh day, they met someone. A boy. Alone. He was younger than Emil, no more than 5, sitting by a tree, wrapped in a fur cloak too large for him. His hands were red with cold. His face streaked with tears. He didn't speak when Ilka knelt beside him. Just stared. Marcin saw the wound then, a cut across the boy's leg, deep and festering. The flies were already there. Ilka begged Marcin to carry him. But Marcin looked at the wound and shook his head. "If we take him, he'll die in a day," he said quietly. "And maybe we'll follow." Ilka's eyes filled with rage. "So we leave him." Marcin didn't answer. But they left him. Not far away, the boys' cries echoed through the trees. None of them slept that night. The next morning, Ilka didn't speak to Marcin. They walked in silence, broken only by Emil's coughing and the sound of boots through wet leaves. Then, at last, the trees broke. And in the valley below, they saw smoke again. But not black this time. White. Cooking fires. Tents. Movement. People. Ilka gasped and clutched Marcin's arm. "Is it real?" she asked. He didn't answer. They stood there a long moment, 4 shadows on the hill, looking down at what might be salvation, or another nightmare in disguise. Then they moved. Down the slope. Step by step. Toward the smoke that didn't rise from ruin, but from life. Hope, fragile as spider's silk, clung to them with every breath. And for the first time in weeks, the wind did not bite. It carried the scent of soup. They descended the hill as though stepping into a dream, feet dragging, breath caught between disbelief and dread. The camp below sprawled across a stretch of open valley where the river forked and split into winding streams. Tents formed a crude half-circle around the water's edge, smoke curling from small fires, voices carrying faint and distant on the wind. No banners flew, no colors of any kingdom. That was good, or dangerous. Marcin kept one hand on the hatchet, the other guiding Emil, who had begun to stumble more often. Ilka walked ahead with Kaya, who, for the first time in days, lifted her head. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but something more painful, hope. They reached the outer edge by midday. The first face they saw was an old woman, bent over a pot of soup, the smell so rich it nearly knocked them to their knees. She glanced up without alarm, only mild curiosity, as though starving strangers were nothing new. "You're late," she said, not unkindly. "Go to the big tent. They'll tell you where you fit." Ilka blinked. "We're not part of. Doesn't matter. Everyone comes from somewhere." She ladled soup into a cracked wooden bowl and handed it to Emil without asking. His hands trembled as he took it. Marcin watched him drink, then turned toward the largest canvas tent at the center of the camp. Inside, the air was thick with heat and herbs. Blankets lined the walls. A fire pit smoldered in the center. Around it sat 6 figures, men and women, wrapped in mismatched armor, old furs, and boiled leather. Their eyes were sharp, but not cruel. "You've come far," said one, a man with a white scar across his scalp and a missing hand. "We've seen worse," Marcin replied. "Everyone has," said another. "We don't ask where you're from. Just what you can do." Ilka stepped forward. "I can mend wounds. I was an herb wife before the fires came." They nodded. "And you?" one asked Marcin. He hesitated. Then, "I kill things. If they try to take what's ours." Another nod. "The children?" asked the scarred man. Marcin tensed. "They're ours. They stay. No one takes children here," the woman said firmly. "We bury too many to waste the ones still breathing." A long silence followed. Then the man with the scar smiled. "Welcome, then. Campfires are warmer with more backs to sit against." That night, they were given a place near the western edge of the camp, under a canvas lean-to with enough space for 4 blankets, a bucket of water, a single lantern. It was more than they had owned in months. Ilka helped clean Emil's feet, torn and swollen. Kaya curled into her side and, for the first time, slept deeply. Marcin sat outside. The stars were out, cold, distant, watching. Someone joined him. One of the guards, a tall woman with gray in her braids and a dagger at her hip. "You've brought ghosts with you," she said quietly. "We all do," he replied. She nodded. "This place isn't safe." "No place is. But it lasts longer than most." "Who runs it?" "No one. Or everyone. We vote. We share. We burn anyone who tries to take more than their share." Marcin looked at her. She smiled faintly. "Fair's fair." Later, Ilka came to sit beside him. They didn't speak at first. Just sat. Then she said, "It feels wrong." "What does?" "Eating. Resting. Like we're stealing something we don't deserve." He exhaled slowly. "It's not wrong. It's just rare." She leaned her head on his shoulder. They watched the fires together. The next morning, Emil didn't wake up. He was warm, peaceful, curled like a kitten, but gone. Ilka screamed when she found him. Kaya didn't understand at first. Marcin stood frozen. The camp buried him at sunset. A ring of stones. A carved name. Emil. No titles. No dates. Only the weight of grief. Kaya wept in silence. Ilka didn't eat for 2 days. Marcin sat by the grave each night, whispering words he didn't know the meaning of. Prayers maybe. Or curses. The camp moved on. Fires burned. Guards rotated. Life continued. But for the 3 who still lived, something had changed. Not the hunger. Not the danger. Those things had always been there. What changed was this: they had found safety. And it still hadn't saved him. The world remained cruel. Even in the warmth. Even in the quiet. Then the man with the scar smiled. "Welcome, then. Campfires are warmer with more backs to sit against." That night, they were given a place near the western edge of the camp, under a canvas lean-to with enough space for 4 blankets, a bucket of water, a single lantern. It was more than they had owned in months. Ilka helped clean Emil's feet, torn and swollen. Kaya curled into her side and, for the first time, slept deeply. Marcin sat outside. The stars were out, cold, distant, watching. Someone joined him. One of the guards, a tall woman with gray in her braids and a dagger at her hip. "You've brought ghosts with you," she said quietly. "We all do," he replied. She nodded. "This place isn't safe." "No place is. But it lasts longer than most." "Who runs it?" "No one. Or everyone. We vote. We share. We burn anyone who tries to take more than their share." Marcin looked at her. She smiled faintly. "Fair's fair." Later, Ilka came to sit beside him. They didn't speak at first. Just sat. Then she said, "It feels wrong." "What does?" "Eating. Resting. Like we're stealing something we don't deserve." He exhaled slowly. "It's not wrong. It's just rare." She leaned her head on his shoulder. They watched the fires together. The next morning, Emil didn't wake up. He was warm, peaceful, curled like a kitten, but gone. Ilka screamed when she found him. Kaya didn't understand at first. Marcin stood frozen. The camp buried him at sunset. A ring of stones. A carved name. Emil. No titles. No dates. Only the weight of grief. Kaya wept in silence. Ilka didn't eat for 2 days. Marcin sat by the grave each night, whispering words he didn't know the meaning of. Prayers maybe. Or curses. The camp moved on. Fires burned. Guards rotated. Life continued. But for the 3 who still lived, something had changed. Not the hunger. Not the danger. Those things had always been there. What changed was this: they had found safety. And it still hadn't saved him. The world remained cruel. Even in the warmth. Even in the quiet. Marcin fetched what he could: plants from the edge of the forest, some dried nettle, and strips of linen. Ilka worked quietly, methodically. Her hands remembered what her heart tried to forget. Kaya stayed close to her now. Too close, as if losing Emil had hollowed something inside the girl that would never be filled. She no longer asked about leaving. She no longer played. She simply watched. One evening, a man limped into camp from the east, bleeding from a cut across his ribs, his breath shallow and ragged. He collapsed near the cooking fire, and guards rushed to him. He carried no weapon, wore no uniform. But he wore a woman's wedding ring around his neck. They took him to the healer's tent, and Ilka was summoned. She returned hours later, her hands red. "He won't last the night," she said. But he asked for someone to sit with him. He didn't want to go alone. Marcin offered to go. In the tent, the man's breath came in rattled gasps. His eyes were open, but unfocused. He held the ring in one hand. "Your wife?" Marcin asked. The man blinked once, then slowly nodded. "Gone, years now. But I kept her with me. All this way." He coughed blood. Marcin wiped it away. "I came from Ravenna. Burned to the ground. Not even the priests were spared." "I know Ravenna," Marcin said. "Passed near it once. Long before the war." The man smiled faintly. "It was green. That's what I remember. The fields. Even when the taxes came. Even when the soldiers came. Still green." He died just before dawn, his eyes on the roof of the tent, as if searching for sky. Marcin returned to Ilka and Kaya just as the camp was waking. The smell of soup, smoke, and unwashed bodies filled the morning air. "They burned Ravenna," he said quietly. Ilka nodded. "They'll burn everything. Eventually." That night, a woman went mad near the southern tents. She began screaming in the dark, slashing at her arms with a bone shard. No one knew why. Some said she had lost her son weeks ago, and the grief had curdled. Others said she'd eaten bad mushrooms. They tried to calm her. They couldn't. She fled into the woods. No one followed. Ilka watched the treeline long after the screams faded. "This world isn't made for mothers anymore," she said. Marcin placed a hand on her shoulder. It was all he could do. The next morning, snow returned. A surprise, late for the season, but cruel in its suddenness. The ground turned white again. And the camp shrank into itself, fires closer, blankets tighter, the sound of coughing louder than ever. They buried 3 more before week's end. But no one left. Because where would they go? The world beyond the camp was worse. And within it, at least, there were names still spoken. And hands that reached out in the dark. The snow did not stay long, but it left behind its mark, bitter winds that tore through the valley, stiffening joints, cracking lips, and silencing the weaker throats before they could cry out. The camp grew quieter with each passing day, not because people left, but because more and more were buried without songs. Marcin woke each morning with frost on his beard. His blanket was never warm enough. Ilka's fingers turned blue at the tips, but she said nothing. She boiled pine needles into tea, swore it kept the cold from killing them outright. Kaya coughed at night, a dry rattle that echoed the way Emil's had once sounded. But she was still breathing. That mattered. The rations grew thinner. Every few days, a hunting party left for the woods, but they came back more desperate. Once, they returned with only roots and a squirrel. Once, they didn't return at all. The camp whispered about it, what they must have found, what must have found them. Marcin joined the next hunt. He left before dawn, carrying his hatchet, with a crust of bread in his pocket and nothing in his stomach. There were 6 of them. By midday, they had found tracks, boar, maybe, or something larger. They followed them deeper into the woods, where the trees closed in and the wind seemed to vanish. Then the smell came. Meat. Burned. They found the fire pit near a stream. Fresh. Ashes warm. Bones, charred and snapped. Not animal bones. Human. Someone had eaten here. Or been eaten. One of the men turned back. He said nothing, just dropped his spear and walked away. No one stopped him. Marcin crouched near the pit, eyes cold, studying the footprints. He counted 3 sets, bare feet, 1 small. A child. He didn't speak of it when they returned to camp that evening empty-handed. Just shook his head and said, nothing worth chasing. Ilka was waiting, trying to boil what little was left of the lentils. Kaya lay beneath the blankets, her cheeks flushed with fever. She no longer spoke, just looked up at the roof of the tent, the way Emil had, her breath coming too fast, too shallow. She needs warmth, Ilka said. Real warmth. A fire. Soup. Blankets. Anything. Marcin looked toward the center of camp. Toward the storage tents. No one would give anything. There wasn't enough to give. So he made a decision. That night, after the fires dimmed and the guards rotated, Marcin crept into the storage tent. He knew the pattern. He had watched for days. A single guard, half asleep. 1 barrel of salted meat. 1 bag of dry grain. He took what he could carry, enough to last them a week if stretched. He returned unnoticed. Ilka didn't ask how. Just wept when he handed her the meat, when she felt Kaya's skin begin to cool hours later. They fed the girl slowly. She slept deeply, not shaking anymore. The next morning, the guards found the theft. They didn't know who, but they searched, and they found the dropped grain in the snow near the western edge. Close to where Marcin and his family slept. They questioned him. He lied. They beat him. Ilka screamed for them to stop. Kaya tried to stand, fell, and vomited. Marcin said nothing, even as the blood ran from his mouth. They left him after a while. Told him if it happened again, he'd be cast out. Not killed, just left beyond the firelight, to whatever waited in the woods. He didn't respond. That night, Ilka wrapped his broken ribs with cloth torn from their only blanket. Was it worth it? She asked. He looked at Kaya, asleep again, her lips no longer cracked. Yes. The next morning, a stranger arrived. He came on horseback, a black steed too well fed for these parts. He wore a faded knight's cloak and polished boots. His beard was short, his expression unreadable. He said nothing at first. Just walked the camp, watching. Then he spoke with the council. Then with the guards. By nightfall, word spread. He came from the south. From a city untouched. Walled and guarded. They needed workers. Fighters. Builders. Anyone who could contribute. Safe. Ilka whispered. No such thing, Marcin replied. But safer. Families were allowed to leave in groups of 10. The first group would leave in 2 days. Ilka wanted to go. Kaya was strong enough now to walk, just barely. Marcin wasn't sure. Why not? She asked. What's left here? He didn't answer right away. Then finally, he said, here, I know what I'm protecting you from. Out there, I don't. Ilka touched his hand. We'll face it together. That night, as Kaya slept and the camp dimmed to a hush, Marcin walked one last time to Emil's grave. The stone was buried in snow now. He brushed it clean, slowly, gently. I'm sorry, he whispered. I couldn't save you, but I'll save her. He stood a long while. Then turned back. Toward the tent. Toward the firelight. Toward the things that might still be saved. She needs warmth, Ilka said. Real warmth. A fire. Soup. Blankets. Anything. Marcin looked toward the center of camp. Toward the storage tents. No one would give anything. There wasn't enough to give. So he made a decision. That night, after the fires dimmed and the guards rotated, Marcin crept into the storage tent. He knew the pattern. He had watched for days. A single guard, half asleep. One barrel of salted meat. One bag of dry grain. He took what he could carry, enough to last them a week if stretched. He returned unnoticed. Ilka didn't ask how. Just wept when he handed her the meat, when she felt Kaya's skin begin to cool hours later. They fed the girl slowly. She slept deeply, not shaking anymore. The next morning, the guards found the theft. They didn't know who, but they searched, and they found the dropped grain in the snow near the western edge. Close to where Marcin and his family slept. They questioned him. He lied. They beat him. Ilka screamed for them to stop. Kaya tried to stand, fell, and vomited. Marcin said nothing, even as the blood ran from his mouth. They left him after a while. Told him if it happened again, he'd be cast out. Not killed, just left beyond the firelight, to whatever waited in the woods. He didn't respond. That night, Ilka wrapped his broken ribs with cloth torn from their only blanket. Was it worth it? She asked. He looked at Kaya, asleep again, her lips no longer cracked. Yes. The next morning, a stranger arrived. He came on horseback, a black steed too well fed for these parts. He wore a faded knight's cloak and polished boots. His beard was short, his expression unreadable. He said nothing at first. Just walked the camp, watching. Then he spoke with the council. Then with the guards. By nightfall, word spread. He came from the south. From a city untouched. Walled and guarded. They needed workers. Fighters. Builders. Anyone who could contribute. Safe. Ilka whispered. No such thing, Marcin replied. But safer. Families were allowed to leave in groups of 10. The first group would leave in 2 days. Ilka wanted to go. Kaya was strong enough now to walk, just barely. Marcin wasn't sure. Why not? She asked. What's left here? He didn't answer right away. Then finally, he said, here, I know what I'm protecting you from. Out there, I don't. Ilka touched his hand. We'll face it together. That night, as Kaya slept and the camp dimmed to a hush, Marcin walked one last time to Emil's grave. The stone was buried in snow now. He brushed it clean, slowly, gently. I'm sorry, he whispered. I couldn't save you, but I'll save her. He stood a long while. Then turned back, toward the tent, toward the firelight, toward the things that might still be saved. The others fled. Silence returned slowly. Marcin stood over the body, breathing hard. Blood clung to his boots. Roddick said nothing, just wiped his blade and nodded once. They buried the bodies off the road. Kaya didn't cry. No one did. That night, the wind turned, and a cold rain followed them. They didn't stop. Even the old man walked with more urgency. On the 6th day, they saw it. The city. It rose beyond a broken hill, flanked by towers of gray stone and a wall thicker than any Marcin had seen in years. Flags flew from its battlements, not of war, but of some old forgotten kingdom. The gates were closed, but lanterns burned beside them. Roddick raised his hand. We wait here. An hour passed. Then the gates opened, and soldiers stepped out, real ones. Clean armor. Shaved faces. They looked at the group not with fear or pity, but with procedure. Roddick handed them the letter. They read it, then nodded. You'll be processed. Quartered. We'll assign you to wards by need. Ilka clutched Kaya's hand. Marcin narrowed his eyes. Processed. For safety, one guard said. Diseases are still a problem. Another added, we can't afford risks. They were led through the gates. The city was nothing like what they imagined. No cheering crowds. No food stalls. No warmth. Just order. Long rows of stone houses. A courtyard where people waited in lines. Fires behind barred windows. They were given numbers, not names. They were told where to sleep, what to eat, when to wake. A new kind of prison. Cleaner. But still a prison. Roddick disappeared into the inner city. No one saw him again. Ilka stared out their assigned window that night. Is this what we survived for? Marcin said, it's not war. Not yet, she replied. Kaya slept on the floor, curled beneath their one blanket. Marcin sat in silence, staring at the metal door that locked from the outside. He didn't say it aloud. But part of him missed the camp. Even the cold. Even the dark. Because in the wilderness, at least, they'd belong to themselves. The sun rose behind gray clouds, casting a dull glow over the walled city that now called itself sanctuary. Inside the holding ward, life followed quiet rhythms, mechanical, regulated, heavy. The residents were not prisoners, not in name, but they were not truly free either. The rules were strict, the silence louder than ever. And the memory of the road, the campfires, and those they had lost lingered in every breath. Marcin woke before the bells, as always. He washed his face in the cold basin, careful not to wake Kaya. She had been coughing again. Not like before, this was gentler, but constant, like her body couldn't forget what it had survived. Ilka was already sitting by the window, sewing a patch into someone else's tunic. She did that now. Quiet work for quiet payment, food stamps, soap, access to warmer water once a week. Her fingers moved skillfully, but her eyes didn't blink much anymore. She watched the street. Storm coming, she said. Marcin joined her, peering out. There was no snow this time. Just wind curling in the alleys like smoke. He nodded. Kaya stirred behind them. Is it morning? It is, Ilka said gently, standing to help her dress. And you're still here. Marcin watched his daughter sit up, her frame too thin under the blanket. He wished he had something better than flatbread and sour stew to feed her. But at least she was alive. After everything, that mattered more than he could say. They were assigned cleaning duty that day, like every third day. Scrubbing stones, disposing of waste, keeping disease at bay, so said the guards. Marcin worked with the boy and his dog, now grown lanky and alert. The boy had stopped asking questions. The dog never barked anymore. Ilka took Kaya with her to the communal kitchens, where she helped peel roots and boil what passed for broth. The city had many mouths and too little to feed them. People still died here, just not with swords. Not with fire. But from slow hunger. Or sadness. Or exhaustion. In the evening, the bells rang early. A new caravan had arrived, refugees from the north. Word passed quietly. A village raised, again. Some said it was the Black Legion, some said the Empire had turned on itself. It didn't matter. War was still out there. It always was. The city took in the newcomers. The wards grew more crowded. Another family assigned to the narrow room next to Marcin's. 4 people in one space. They cried the first night, not loudly. Just muffled sobs. Marcin didn't knock on the wall. He didn't say welcome. He just listened, and let them cry. That night, Ilka took out the old cloth bundle she'd kept hidden all this time. Inside was Emil's tiny shirt. She had refused to leave it behind. She touched it now with trembling hands. I dream of him less, she said. Marcin didn't reply. I don't know if that's good or bad. Marcin placed a hand over hers. He knew he loved him. That's what matters. Kaya sat between them, resting her head on her mother's arm. Will it always be like this? She asked. Ilka looked at Marcin, but he answered. No. One day, it'll be different. Maybe not for us. But maybe for someone else. Kaya nodded, like she understood. Or maybe just needed to believe it. That night, the wind howled through the narrow streets, rattling shutters and lifting dust from the corners of the stone floors. Marcin couldn't sleep. He walked to the small window and stared out at the dark. He thought of the camp. Of the firelight. Of burying Emil in the snow. He thought of the madwoman in the woods, the men who begged for meat, the boy who carried a ring for a wife long dead. And he thought of the silence that followed war, not peace, but the hush of things broken too many times to be mended. In the morning, another name would be added to the city wall, someone who had passed in the night, as many did, without song or ceremony. The list was long now. They etched them with chalk. The rain would wash them away eventually. Marcin didn't cry. Not anymore. But as the first light touched the rooftops, he whispered his son's name. Just once. Into the wind. And for a moment, he thought he heard an echo. A soft sound. Like a flute in the trees. Then it was gone. And the city carried on. As it always did. And the war, though quiet for now, waited beyond the gates. Forever patient. Forever watching.